Before today's video starts, we want to bring you a quick word from our sponsor, The Ridge. For years, I used a bulky leather wallet that was probably designed in the 90s, and it was always a pain. In the wallet, I'd store receipts that I didn't need and coupons that I never remembered to use. But then the people at The Ridge sent me this awesome carbon fiber wallet. It has a sleek, industrial design that is easy to carry and is much more functional than those old leather wallets. Ridge wallets hold 12 cards plus money, so I don't keep junk in there that I just end up throwing out later. Ridge wallets are also incredibly durable, and they come with a lifetime warranty. You can even try out a wallet for 45 days. If you don't love it, just return the wallet and get a full refund. Right now, The Ridge is offering criminally listed viewers 10% off with free worldwide shipping and returns. Just go to ridge.com/listed, that's ridge.com/listed, and use the promo code LISTED in the description box. Step up your wallet game today, and please help support Criminally Listed by checking out ridge.com/listed. Number 3. Lynn Scott. In January 1977, Lynn Scott was 18 years old, and she was living in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Scott grew up in Creede, Colorado. She had 2 brothers and a sister. Scott's family thought she was a bit wild. She had dropped out of school when she was 14. In early 1977, Scott was legally married, but she and her husband were separated. Her husband lived about 45 miles away in Pueblo, Colorado. Scott was unemployed, and she was living with her boyfriend, Andy Jaramillo. On the night of January 18, 1977, Jaramillo went to work. It was a cold night, and sometime between 8 and 9 p.m., Scott left their apartment. She walked into an A&W restaurant that was less than 100 feet from their apartment. Several people saw Scott in the restaurant. She then went out to a phone booth that was in the parking lot of the restaurant. At around 9 p.m., Scott called her boyfriend at work from the payphone. As Scott and Jaramillo talked, he heard her start arguing with a man. Jaramillo did not recognize the man's voice. Then suddenly, he heard Scott scream, and the call went dead. Jaramillo was spooked by the call, so he phoned the police. Some officers went to the phone booth. Scott was nowhere to be found. The police did not find any evidence of a struggle or a confrontation, so they interviewed people who were in the area. Several people said that they saw a young woman being dragged from the phone booth to a car by a man, but none of them remembered what the man or the car looked like. A man who worked at a gas station near the phone booth saw an orange car in the area around the time Scott went missing, but he did not see Scott or see or hear anything that sounded like an abduction. Jaramillo returned to their apartment and he waited for Scott to come home. He was hoping it was just a disturbing prank. Unfortunately, Lynn Scott did not return to their apartment. The next morning, just after 7:30, 2 children were walking to school near the Colorado Springs Municipal Service Center. They were about 3 miles away from the phone booth where Scott had been kidnapped from. The children came across the dead body of a young woman. They ran to a nearby business, and the business owner called the police. The body was identified as 18-year-old Lynn Scott. She was fully clothed, and the medical examiner said that there was no evidence that she had been sexually assaulted. It appeared she had been strangled to death with a cord. The medical examiner estimated she had been killed around midnight, which is about 3 hours after she was kidnapped. It also appeared that the killer dumped her body by pushing it out of a moving car. There were two odd things about the body. The first was that all of Scott's long blonde hair had been cut off. Why the killer did this, or forced her to do it to herself, is unknown. Something else that the medical examiner thought was odd was that Scott's wrist showed no signs of being bound. He thought it was odd because of the killer held Scott captive for a few hours and cut off her hair. Bounding her wrist would have made all that much easier to do. The police were completely baffled by the murder. They checked with all the usual persons of interest, but they were all cleared as suspects. No new leads ever emerged, and the case quickly went cold. With so few clues, it's doubtful that the murder of Carol Lynn Scott will ever be solved. Number 2. Brittany Zimmerman. In the spring of 2008, Brittany Zimmerman was 21 years old. She was a student at the University of Madison, Wisconsin, also known as UW-Madison. She lived with her fiancé, Jordan Godring, in an apartment that was about a mile from the campus. By all accounts, Zimmerman was a bright young woman. In high school, she was a member of the school band, and she was also a member of the National Honor Society. She also did volunteer work in her community. When Zimmerman graduated from high school, she was in the top 10% of her class. At UW-Madison, she was studying immunology and medical microbiology. Once again, Zimmerman excelled at school. She was on the dean's list in the fall of 2005 and spring 2006. Zimmerman wanted to be a physician when she was done school. On the morning of April 2, 2009, both Zimmerman and her fiancé, Jordan Godring, went to the school's campus. That morning, Zimmerman had an exam. At around 11:30 a.m., they talked on their cell phones. The building Godring was in had a balcony. As they talked on their phones, Godring stood out on the balcony and he waved to Zimmerman, who was on the ground. Zimmerman then headed home. At 11:57 a.m., Zimmerman called her mother, but her mother did not answer. 3 minutes later, Zimmerman logged onto her computer at home, and she worked on it until 12:18. Less than an hour later, Jordan Godring called 911. He said he had come home and found his 21-year-old fiancée shot to death. He said that she was cold to the touch and there was blood on her face. Police officers arrived at their apartment at 1:08 p.m. The medical examiner determined that Zimmerman had not been shot. Instead, she had been beaten, strangled, and stabbed multiple times in the heart. The knife has never been found. The police determined that the killer forced open one of the building's doors, and then he got into Zimmerman's apartment. The police learned that nothing had been stolen. Jordan Godring was quickly cleared as a suspect. The police had no idea who might have wanted to hurt Zimmerman. They suspected that a homeless man or a transient may have killed her. People living in the neighborhood said that they had seen several homeless people walk into unlocked buildings and homes. The police even arrested a vagrant in connection with the murder, but then they released him. A month after the murder, it was revealed that on the day of the murder, at 12:19 p.m., a call came into 911 from Brittany Zimmerman's cell phone. This is around the time when it's suspected she was murdered. The call lasted a minute. About 24 seconds into the call, the dispatcher tried to trace the call, but was unsuccessful. The dispatcher said that she only heard some people talking in the background. There were other calls to be answered, so she went on to another call. She was supposed to call Zimmerman's phone back, but she simply forgot because she became busy with other calls. The police reviewed the audio recording of the call. Everyone who has listened to the recording said you can clearly hear a woman screaming, and then it sounds like there's a struggle. The dispatcher who took the call was a 20-year veteran of the 911 center, and she had no disciplinary problems. She was interviewed about Zimmerman's call, and during the interview, she listened to a recording of the call. Witnesses reported that while she listened to the recording, she visibly reacted. Unfortunately, the 911 center was responsible for another problem with the investigation. One of their employees had made a clerical error, and they gave the incorrect information to the police. For 2 weeks, the police followed leads based on that incorrect information. Brittany Zimmerman's family sued the county over the 911 center's actions, and they settled out of court. Several news outlets also sued the county because they wanted to have the recording of Zimmerman's 911 call released. The county responded by releasing a censored version of the call that was made by Jordan Gonering, but they refused to release Zimmerman's call. The county said that they did not want to release the audio for several reasons. The first is that they were worried that people's trust in the 911 dispatching center might be shaken. They also did not want to traumatize Zimmerman's friends and family. Finally, the police said that releasing the call could jeopardize their investigation. The judge only agreed with the last argument and decided that the call should not be made public if it would do something that jeopardizes the investigation. There was a review of the county's 911 center. They concluded that the center worked well, but the dispatchers were forced to work too many mandatory overtime hours. In fact, the dispatcher who took the call from Zimmerman's phone had asked to be transferred shortly before the call. She wanted to be transferred because of the amount of mandatory overtime hours. After the review, the 911 center cut the number of mandatory hours and they added more staff. Over the years, the police continued to investigate Brittany Zimmerman's murder. Potential leads would pop up every few years, but they turned out not to lead anywhere. Then in February 2016, nearly 8 years after the murder, the police told Brittany Zimmerman's family they had a big break in the case. 2 months earlier, they found out that some DNA found on Brittany's shirt sleeve was matched to a man who was in the neighborhood on the day of the murder. But the police did not tell them the man's name. Months later, in June 2016, the man's name became public when a search warrant became unsealed. The suspect was 49-year-old David Hall. He was the man who was arrested shortly after the murder but was released. Hall had been in Zimmerman's neighborhood on the day of the murder, and the police questioned him that day. He also gave them a sample of his DNA. Hall had been going door to door asking for money to help him repair a tire. But he admitted he was just looking for money to buy drugs and he was high on crack cocaine. One woman in the neighborhood complained about him because he had walked into her home and scolded her for not locking her door. The woman told him to get out and he left. A reporter tracked down David Hall. He was in jail because he had been arrested months earlier for his 7th drunk driving charge. The reporter asked Hall about his whereabouts for the day of the murder. He admitted he had talked to Brittany Zimmerman that day, but he denied killing her. The police interviewed Hall's friend and former roommate, Andrew Scholes. At the time, Scholes was serving a 20-month sentence in West Virginia on a weapons charge. Scholes told the police that Call had confessed to him. He told the police he would tell them what he knew on one condition. He wanted a presidential pardon. Scholes was convicted of possession of marijuana in 2010, and in 2014, he was convicted of possession of a firearm as a felon. He wanted both charges expunged. At the time, the district attorney wanted to hear what Scholes knew about the murder because they did not have enough evidence to charge Call. His DNA on Zimmerman's sleeve was not enough evidence that he had killed her. 2 years went by, and then Scholes died. He never told the police what he knew about Brittany Zimmerman's murder. As the years went on, more DNA testing was done on Zimmerman's shirt and jeans. During that time, DNA technology advanced. The police also continued to interview David Hall. His story kept changing every time they asked him what he was doing on the day of the murder. That March 20th, 2020, nearly 12 years after Brittany Zimmerman's murder, 53-year-old David Hall was charged with first-degree intentional homicide. More of his DNA had been found on Zimmerman's clothes. Hall's criminal record dates back to 1992. In 1993, he was convicted of sexually assaulting his girlfriend. As a result, he was a lifetime registered sex offender. He's also been convicted of dealing drugs, theft, and of course, driving under the influence. Zimmerman's parents said that the arrest is the start of justice for their daughter. But they said nothing will ever bring their daughter back, and that is a pain they feel every day. A recording of Brittany Zimmerman's last phone call has never been made public. Many people think that the county does not want the recording to be made public because it will reflect poorly on the 911 center. Those who want the recording released say that the people of the county should be able to hear the call so they can judge for themselves if the call was mishandled or not. Number 1. Ray Thomas Walker Jr. December 1st, 1980 started off as a typical day at KDFW TV in Dallas, Texas. Then, that evening, the switchboard got a phone call. The man on the phone said he had a good story. His call was transferred to the newsroom, and a producer answered the phone. The caller told the producer he had killed his wife and their 4 children. The caller explained he had been depressed and he had planned on dying by suicide, but he did not think his family would be able to cope with the loss and they would not survive without him. So he decided to kill them as well. Then the line went dead. The man called back several times. The producer called the police, and several police officers came to the TV station. While the officers were there, the man called in again for the 7th time, and he talked to a reporter. While they talked, the police started tracing the call. The man revealed that he was 36-year-old Thomas Ray Walker Jr. Thomas told the reporter he was born and raised in Dallas. He explained that he did not have an easy childhood. He was a loner and he had emotional problems. But he didn't think that anyone realized how disturbed he really was. He dropped out of school in the 9th or 10th grade. Thomas had been a house painter for a company, but he revealed he had lost his job because he had a terrible attendance record. He explained he had missed work because he couldn't stand being away from his family. It turned out that Thomas owed back taxes to the Internal Revenue Service. Thomas didn't think he'd be able to financially provide for his family anymore. Thomas and his family had recently sold their house in a Dallas suburb, and they had moved into a rented house in a different neighborhood. Thomas was well known in his new neighborhood because he was overprotective of his children. He did not want his children playing outside with other children. Several times a week, Thomas would go to his children's schools and sit in the back of the classroom. Thomas told the reporter that morning the children had all gone to school. He was at home with his 35-year-old wife, Linda, and she was talking on the phone. Thomas thought she sounded really stressed out. He said he decided to give her some peace. Linda hopped into the shower, and Thomas said he went and got his gun, a .32 caliber Smith & Wesson. He then went into the washroom and watched as Linda showered. Thomas said he waited until she started washing her face because he knew her eyes would be closed. He then stepped on the toilet so he could see down into the shower stall. He aimed the gun and shot her in the head. He wasn't sure if he killed her, so he opened the glass shower door and he shot her again. This time, he shot her between the eyes. He then washed the blood off himself and he turned off the water. Thomas and Linda's 4 children went to 3 different schools. First, Thomas went to the school that his 11-year-old daughter, Tammy, attended. Thomas said that he had told his daughter that he had won $5,000 in a contest and they were all going to take a trip to Houston where they were going to do some shopping. He then told her he had another surprise for her at home. He said it was something she always wanted. When they got home, Thomas had Terry go into her bedroom, lay down on her bed, and close her eyes. Thomas explained to the reporter that Terry had laid down on the bed in a way that she was facing away from him. He then shot her once in the back of the head. Thomas said that he then went to the school of his 2 sons, 9-year-old Joe and 7-year-old Nicholas. He pulled them out of class and told them he had a surprise for them at home. When they got home, Thomas had them play in the backyard. He then called Joe inside. He had Joe lay down on his bed with his eyes closed. Thomas said as Joe laid on his stomach, he shot him in the back of the head. He then called Nicholas inside and did the exact same thing to him. Thomas said that after he shot his sons, they did not make any movements or sounds. He said he had hoped their deaths were painless. Thomas said that after he killed most of his family, he went and got a beer from the fridge. His eldest child, 14-year-old Tracy, attended a school that was close to their home. Thomas could see the school from their back door. Thomas said as he drank his beer, he watched the school. He then started to regret what he had done. He wished he could have turned back the clock a few hours because he wouldn't have gone through with his deadly plan. He also considered letting Tracy live, but he did not think she would live a normal life after the rest of her family was killed. Thomas said that he felt like he had no other choice but to finish the job. He watched as Tracy walked home and he noticed that she had 2 friends with her. Thomas said he was worried that the 2 girls would come inside the house with her. So he went outside and told Tracy she should go to a nearby convenience store. He then gave her $5. Tracy and her friends walked towards the store, and Thomas went back inside the house. When Tracy returned a few minutes later, she was alone. Thomas said that he hid as she walked into the home. When Tracy walked by him, he stepped out and shot her in the back of the head. Thomas said that when he shot Tracy, she made a small scream, and this disturbed him. Thomas told the reporter he was hoping that her death would have been painless. Thomas said that when Tracy fell, she either landed on her back or he turned her over. He said he couldn't specifically remember. Nevertheless, he shot her again in the face to make sure she was dead. Once Thomas had wiped out his family, he collected some items he wanted his parents to have. He then got in his vehicle and started driving towards his parents' house. Thomas explained that as he was driving, he felt the need to confess to someone about what he had just done. So he found a payphone and he called the TV station. He kept changing payphones and then he would call the station back. He called the TV station 7 times and he spent about 3 hours talking to employees at the TV station. The employees recorded a lot of the conversation. Then, during the 7th call, the reporter heard tires screeching. It turned out that the police had traced Thomas's call to a phone booth that was in the parking lot of a grocery store in Dallas. Into the phone, Thomas said, "Wait, there's a car." The reporter, who was talking to Thomas on the phone, heard a police officer yell, "Get your hands up right now." Then he heard Thomas shout, "No, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me." This was followed by a barrage of gunshots. The 3 officers at the scene said that Thomas reached for his gun, so they fired 13 shots at him. 36-year-old Thomas Ray Walker Jr. was shot at least 3 times, and he was pronounced dead on the scene. The police then went to his family's home. Inside the house, they found the dead bodies of his 5 family members. It appeared that the murders went down exactly the way Thomas Ray Walker Jr. said it did on his last phone call. Thank you so much for watching today's video. We hope you found it interesting. If you're looking for some new videos to watch, why not check out my new channel, Chapter Dark, and see if you can solve the mysteries in the videos. If you like riddles, puzzles, or escape rooms, Chapter Dark will be right up your alley. A link to Chapter Dark should appear on the screen momentarily, and you can also find a link in the description box below this video. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, we'd really appreciate it if you gave us a thumbs up. Please also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Roku. The links are in the description box. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching, and please stay safe.